Somebody said that, it's the post-lunch lull. So the last person to fall asleep, let everybody else know how good it was. This session revolves around resources, and we touched on some of this yesterday in our last conversation about talking to emerging generations about these technologies. So what I decided to do for this one is to take the list that you had access to through that QR code for books and YouTube things, and I'm going to go through some of the ones that I recommend the most, or that I feel good promoting. Excuse me, that I've either that I've either read thoroughly or at least have an idea. A technology guy that can't work technology. I don't know if it's a battery thing. Try this. No. Yeah, try turning it off and then back on. Nope. That's not. I'm hanging. There we go. Does anybody else just really find that animation very pleasing? Good, because I love it, and I don't know if people ever notice it, but it makes me very happy. A couple of years ago, I read this book. I read it in 2022, I think it was, and this is my favorite book of the year, and it's been one of my favorite books with regards to family and parenting since then. It's called Habits of the Household, and it's not specifically about technology, but it definitely talks about technology, that practicing the story of God in everyday family rhythms. So it's really about creating a culture in your household that revolves around God and revolves around the scriptures. Just a lot of really practical stuff in there. A couple of chapters, it gets a little bit rambly, but overall, I felt like the whole book was really, really good. There's a group of young dads at Madison right now that are on their own, are going through this book and doing like a little book club thing. And so everybody that I've recommended it to that has read it has also found a lot of value in it. So this is one that I would put at the top of the list. It's not a long read. Justin Whitmore Early, he has a YouTube channel, so you can get several of his devotional thoughts and some video accompaniment to that. This is one that I would recommend for every parent to read, grandparents as well. This is one of my favorite books, and this is where all of the information, almost all of the data on the generations gap lesson came from. Jean Twenge, she's written several books, very accomplished author and written a bunch of essays as well. She is a researcher. She wrote a book called Gen Z a couple of years ago, and it was it was kind of the standard on study on Gen Z and some of the themes that are starting to develop. Last year, I believe it was that 2023? Yeah, April of 2023, she came out with this book. It's the largest, she's used the largest data set that we have access to up to today to put together this study on the real differences between Gen Z, Millennials, Gen X, Boomers, and Silence, and then what they mean for America's future. So some really fascinating research. She has done a lot of research also with another book we'll get to in a minute with Jonathan Haidt. He wrote the book, The Coddling of the American Mind. That was probably his most well-known book up until a couple of weeks ago. He's released a new book called The Anxious Generation, and they've collaborated on some of their research. But what I like about this is she explains things really easily, really well, but you also have access to all the original documents, so all the Pew Research, to all the big research groups. She cites all of her data, so it has an academic element, which I like from a further reading standpoint. You can get access to those original documents, but it's written in a way that I don't think you get too bogged down. She breaks up her chapters so you can get to the practical stuff without having to do all the analytical things. But my recommendation is, if somebody here is really fascinated with this kind of study, this would be a great Bible class. Myself and one of our probably soon-to-be elders at Madison are going to collaborate at some point in the near future to try to turn this into a class, because the information is really interesting. And as we saw this morning, it paints a picture of context for how we got to where we are and what our churches are made up of people-wise. So she identifies some really big overarching trends. The TechWise Family is probably the shortest book on this list, and it's one of the most powerful as far as anyone with children or with young people in their life. It's a really, really good book. It's been around for a few years now. Everyday steps for putting technology in its proper place. Reading it today, some things that he talks about will be a little bit dated because it's now 7 years old, but the overall premise, the overall structure, and the principles there are very, very good. So this was kind of a standard reading for any family, I think, in the digital age. Glow Kids is written by a fellow by the name of Nicholas Kardaras, and he's I believe he was a psychiatrist, and so he put together this book based off of his research of how screen addiction is hijacking our kids, specifically talking about like video game addiction. That's where I think his research began. And so this one is again, it's got a lot of really good practical stuff. Dr. Nicholas Kaddaras says there, starting argument that technology has profoundly affected the brains of our children and not for the better. So he was his book was very popular when it came out, of introducing some of the cutting edge research that we've just kind of built upon since then. You'll see in like from 2010 to 2015, 16, 17, that's when we started really getting research to say, hey, there's a problem here, that the brain is changing in how it forms and learns and operates. And so there's a gap in how we relate to each other because they really are different. It's just how they think and reason. Younger generations has changed. And part of that, take for instance, we talked about freedom and what the car used to represent to most generations. That was a milestone in life, a turning point of freedom. But today, because they've grown up for 15 years playing with people all across the world online, the world is smaller. And so getting from your driveway to the grocery store parking lot doesn't represent freedom anymore the way that it once did. So understanding kind of how these changes have occurred help us to relate to one another and to listen to one another. This is a very, very good resource for anyone that is struggling with or wants to help people that struggle with particularly pornography addiction. It is Gary Wilson's book. If you notice, I had several quotes from him. He does a great job of taking the scientific and putting it into practical. This is the actual consequence of these things. So this is a book, again, it's not very big either. None of these are, you'll notice the theme in what I read. They're not necessarily massive volumes, but this one is just a really, really practical book. You see there, it's a #1 bestseller, 4.7 stars out of 4,000 ratings. So it's not written from a spiritual standpoint, but excellent scientific research to better understand what's happening with addiction. Analog Christian, Cultivating Contentment, Resilience, and Wisdom in the Digital Age. I actually read Jay Kim's previous book, Analog Church, which ironically came out, I think it was the end of February or the beginning of March of 2020. So he wrote a book and released it on the eve of the pandemic. He wrote a book about being in each other's lives. It was a really interesting time. So when it first came out, it didn't get a lot of attention, but about 6 months into 2020, people started discovering it. So this is the follow-up. The first one is really written towards ministry, toward folks that are in ministry and creating culture, church leadership. But this one is written for individuals. And what I love is that he really highlights resilience, contentment, and wisdom. Those three pillars. He does a great job of creating a very biblical case for each of those and how technology can hinder each of those. So this is one, it's an easy read. He's been on a bunch of podcasts as well. I think he's ministers out in California somewhere, but really, actually in Silicon Valley is actually where he lives. So a unique perspective coming particularly from that area. Strange New World. This one it's not one that I would recommend like for kids, but Carl Trueman has two versions of this book. One is called The Rise of the Modern Self, which is a very academic version. It's massive. It's a really big volume. He wrote that, and one of his contemporaries said, hey, this is essential reading. This is excellent, but you have to make it to where the common person can read it. So that's the copy that I bought, called Strange New World. This is the version where he consolidates all of that research and gives a really good, concise overview of the last 100 years, how thinkers, activists redefined identity and sparked the sexual revolution. So a lot of the things that we talked about today came from his collection of research. Particularly, there's a guy that he refers to as Reich, R-A-I-C-H. He was a philosopher. And he combined the thoughts of Marx, like the government is the authority, and Freud, that sexual identity is the main authority, and he kind of blends those together in this weird philosophical cocktail. And that's kind of where we are today, right? He wrote this and talked about these things 100 years ago in the 1920s. So this book is really helpful at kind of seeing the landscape of the last 100 years of how we got to where we are in our thinking today. Screens and teens, and this is one that if you're a parent and we talked about maybe putting in some literature that your kids need to read before they get access to devices, this is one I would read as a parent first, and then I would have my kids also read it and talk about it. And say, well, what did you think about that? What stood out to you about these things? And trying to, again, it's almost 9 years old now. It's wild how these books, as soon as they're written, they're almost antiquated these days. But this still has some really good stuff. It helps us, it gives you some guidance on how to connect with your kid, gives some good questions to ask and that kind of thing. Screen Kids, this is one that I have not read, but I do have it. It's one I'm hoping to get to. But this is more, Gary Chapman, he's the guy, the author of the 5 Love Languages, so it's in that series. 5 relational skills every child needs in a tech-driven world. That sounded really good, and that's what I need to know as a parent. So this one's on my list to read this year, but it came highly recommended. You see it's less than 200 ratings, but still a 4.7 on Amazon there. So I think this one is supposed to provide some very practical framework for us to discuss these things with our kids and to identify some of these skills that they need that they're not necessarily getting in everyday life like they once did. When things are automated, you don't have to be as resilient, you don't have to be as strong in certain ways. They're not flexing the same muscles that we did and our parents and grandparents did growing up. So this helps us kind of identify some of those. People to Be Loved by Preston Sprinkle. If you have struggled with homosexuality, same-sex attraction, or know people that do, or if that's a conversation, I have found this to be a very good resource. It seems to be very balanced. He points everything to Scripture. And Preston Sprinkle's he's one of the leading researchers, I would say, within the broad term of Christianity in the United States. He's got a podcast called Theology in the Raw that he talks about some really, really deep, sometimes really philosophical, but also really a lot of sexuality research he's put in. He's got several books. This is the one that I feel like has been the most practical. I used for a class a few years ago. And this is the one I referenced earlier, Jonathan Haidt. My copy should have been delivered Friday. I'm excited to read it. Read a lot about the book and seen a lot of excerpts from the book. And this would be considered the most relevant research regarding Gen Z and younger, how the great rewiring of childhood is causing an epidemic of mental illness. He is a great follow on Instagram of information. He's introduced 4 new social norms that he wants us all to adopt in today's age. The first one is no social media before 16, no cell phones in schools, recalibrate play, and I knew I was going to forget it. I think I had it pulled up. No smartphones before high school, no social media before 16, phone-free schools, and more independence, free play, and responsibility in the real world, which is a natural conclusion based off of all the things we've looked at in the research we've seen over the last couple of days, is that our kids aren't playing outside. They're not climbing trees like they once did. They're not problem solving, because it's not just play. What happens in play is you learn interpersonal dynamics. You learn how to be the bully and how to deal with the bully, right? You learn how to take up for people. You learn dynamics, interpersonal dynamics. You learn that when you fall down, you can get back up. You learn that you can be creative when you're bored, and boredom has a lot of value. We've taken away boredom because we've occupied ourselves, not just our children, we've occupied ourselves with stuff and with these devices. So this, again, this one I'm pretty excited to dive into it. It seems weird to say I'm excited to read about a book called The Anxious Generation, but I'm not anxious to read it, I'm just excited. All right, so now we're moving into a few resources that I think are helpful. This is called the Gab phone. This right now, again, our family is not necessarily in the smartphone world with our kids yet. Our kids are still a little bit young for that, but based off of my friends that are in that stage and based off of the research I've come to, the Gab phone seems to be a very popular help to families. The Gab phone is a device that is safe for kids and teens, so it's something that you can incrementally add. It's basically just a telephone, and you can add technology without it being your phone. So you as a parent can have control over it more so than a typical mobile device. So it's GABB, and this is, I believe, their 3rd version of the Gab phone, but this one is quite popular right now. I think it's just gab.com for their website. Bark Technologies is another great resource. Bark is a good follow on Instagram. They have a lot of research that they publish there, a lot of interviews and things they do. But Bark they have levels. They have their own phone now, but it's also an app that you can set parental controls on your kids' devices, not just mobile phones. but they have a whole host of research. They're available on all the major phone platforms, iOS, Android, as well as I think desktop, Windows, and places like that. But they can block websites. You get alerts if there's questionable content. You can set different filters. You can set the intensity of those filters. You can monitor the content yourself. You can shut down their phone and monitor their screen time and lock it down, all from your parental controls. So if you're looking for kind of an all-in-one parental control platform, I would definitely give Bark Technologies a look. It seems to do really well with the people I know of that have used it. They've been very pleased with it. Also, just your phone itself. It has a lot of parental controls there. Talk to your mobile provider and ask them, what are your options on parental controls? You can set filter settings on your router so that certain content doesn't even make it into your home. You can set those controls there at the router. If you have somebody here that's in IT, I would suggest let's do a day, host an afternoon where it's an IT day, Help Desk Sunday, and not just for we've done that before. It was aimed more towards the elderly in our congregation, but I want to do a day where we help the elderly become less of a target for scams, but also we help parents make these kinds of really practical modifications to their home to try and buffer ourselves from some of these things getting in and having access to our kids or to ourselves. If you or someone you know does struggle with lustful content, particularly pornography, there's a software called Covenant Eyes that has been around now for several years. It was out when I was either in high school or college. It's been around for at least 10 years. I've used it in different ways. I currently have a couple of folks that I'm considered like an accountability partner. And what that does is they have given me access to see some of the content that they see on their phone. So I can set the parameters for them based off of the strength that we feel like we need to filter. And if they go to anything on their phone, whether it's a social media site or internet site, it'll send me like a fractaled, just a blurred out image that says there's questionable content, and I can slowly kind of refine that image to see in case they don't want your accountability partner to also be tempted, I guess, as well. So they kind of put some parameters in there. But the biggest thing it does for me, it says, hey, there's a chance this is questionable. So all I got to do is send a text, hey, man, you doing okay? Like, oh, yeah, I guess you got an alert. Yeah, I was doing some research for this or that, and it showed there was an advertisement for, I don't know, socks or something. Typically that's what it is. But sometimes it creates that buffer or that path of resistance that the technology really tends to try to take away from us. We have to build back in. That resistance is accountability. To sharpen one another. It means to have hard conversations. It means to say, hey, I'm deeply struggling with this, and I trust you to help me with this, to be a help. So please, hold me accountable. And the thing that devices do is they keep us anonymous and they keep us private and isolated. This takes away that isolation. You're not alone. That's their whole emphasis is you're not alone. So they have an app that they provide that you can check in with people. I get a message from the app every couple of days that, hey, now's a great time to check in with with your accountability people and that kind of thing. So just prompts someone to be accountable in your life. Excuse me. And just there's a reason God uses confession as a means to reconcile us to Him and to each other. This is a way to do that in the digital world. Satan has tried to get rid of that and try to subvert that, and we have to put a little bit more effort into bringing that in. Wait Until 8th is a nonprofit organization, and this is their Instagram page. It's just Wait Until 8th. You type that in, you'll find them. They have a lot of research as well. You'll see there, for some reason, there's a post about Buddy the Elf, looks like. But a lot of the quotes that I referenced regarding some celebrities, that has come from there. They posted an article from The Atlantic recently that had some good information about getting tech out of the classroom before it's too late. One of their posts here, I'm looking at it, is Ryan Gosling and Eva Mendes. Gosling was most recently in the movie Barbie. The proud parents of Esmeralda, Amanda 8, and Amanda Lee 7. They don't have Wi-Fi in their home. In a video uploaded to Instagram, Menendez went on the record with her Wi-Fi free policy and why she thinks it's important to keep her daughters offline for now. It's sometimes encouraging to hear that some celebrities are taking this seriously, and that even though they may have made their name because of technology and because of entertainment, they're also taking their role as parents seriously. So to me, it's had some helpful information, and it's just encouraging to see. They'll talk about different school systems that have made progress in banning devices and phones in their classrooms and things like that. So it's a good follow as far as Instagram goes, and they have more information on their website if you want to get more plugged in. Jonathan Haidt, again, the author of The Anxious Generation, right now in particular, because his book is so new, he's posting excerpts, really, really good charts and graphs and data to help us get a fuller picture of what's going on. So especially if you enjoy the research side of it, that's a good one. Evolving AI is an account that I just recently started following, and what I've liked about it, they're apparently not new, they've got 1.6 million followers, but they kind of give late-breaking AI news. And we didn't really get into it this weekend, but artificial intelligence and virtual reality are two things that the church needs to be discussing. During the pandemic, most of us probably were at home for a little while. I'm sorry to keep going back to that, but it was a very pivotal time. Most of us sat at home for at least a number of weeks. For us, it was a couple months, and we watched online the worship as we worshiped in our homes. And if you turned your TV up pretty loud, it kind of felt like you were in the auditorium. It almost had that sense of it. Now imagine if you could put a headset on, a set of just kind of big goggles, and you heard the sound, the singing was very loud, so it felt like you were there. And then when you looked in those goggles to your left and to your right, well, I see Nathan sitting over there. It's not really Nathan, but it's his avatar that looks like him. I see Joseph. Well, this is not really Joseph, but it's his avatar. Like imagine that's one more step towards well, this feels almost real. Who of us would not have given to have one more step of close proximity than just watching a one-dimensional television screen? That sounds pretty good to me. That sounds like a help. But wherever we end with AI and VR is where the next generation will begin. So we need to teach them that what represents the real thing is not the real thing. If you look at a statue of Michael Jordan, it's not Michael Jordan, right? It's just it's bronze. It's some kind of metal. But it's meant to point you to the man as the player, his legacy, all those things. When we see each other online, the virtual representation of the church and of people and of community is not the exact same as the real thing. It's meant to point us to the real thing. So we have to make sure that as our kids are growing up here, that they have connections with people that are their age and people that are older than them. And then as they get older, also people that are younger than them. We have to make sure that the experience here as God's church is always better than the experience of anything that is exclusively found online. I just completed a degree online. I don't know anybody that I went to school with in any of those classes. I know my professor a little bit because he's Swiss and really interesting, and I follow him on Instagram. He owns a sheep farm, and that's odd, so it's fun to I don't know, it's just intriguing, right? But we don't talk with regularity. There's not a substance to our relationship. I'm a creeper as much as anything, right? I'm an observer. We're not called to be observers. We're called to be actively engaged in each other's lives. And so I think learning about emerging technology is really important for all ages in the church, because the younger folks are going to be engaging with this as their normal life for the rest of their life. And so it's worthwhile for us to teach them how to think about it. The devices and the platforms are always going to change. As a parent, you can't keep up with the latest app. It's not, I don't think it's possible. It doesn't mean we don't try. But my goal is not necessarily to teach them about every single app that comes out. My goal is to teach them how to think about technology. And that is the bigger picture that we are, I think, in search of here. This is another one called Smartphone Free Childhood that I recently started following. They seem to be based out of Europe, but there's a lot of interesting things, policies that are being put forth in some European schools and their education system, particularly in some of the private schools that I think they add value, and they give you some things to think about as a parent. But that's smartphone-free childhood. Also gives you ideas of how to generate interest for your kid to just go play outside. Give them a stick and let them go fight their battles. Common Sense Media is another website. If you're looking for things to give you reviews about movies or entertainment music, things like that, you can get a paid subscription and get access to more information. But they're not Christian, but they are pro-family. And so some of the things probably may not align exactly with your value, but on the whole, I have found it to be a beneficial source. They'll at least give you a breakdown of what kind of content is in different movies and stuff like that. So typically, if our kids ask to watch something that we've not seen or heard of, this is the first place I go to at least begin the research and that sort of thing. This is I think the last one. This is what was referenced a couple times. It's called humanetech.org or .com. I thought it was .org. The Center for Humane Technology. This is Tristan Harris's nonprofit. And what I should have done another screenshot of this. If you go up on their main menu bar there and click on resources, they have some really, really helpful resources. For instance, I have installed on my computer, I get trapped in the rabbit hole of YouTube. I deleted Instagram a couple of years ago. It was just taking too much time. And then I discovered YouTube and just basically replaced it, which is not helpful. But what is really helpful is one of their resources is a Chrome add-on. And so you can an extension for your Chrome browser. If you use Chrome particularly, it will go, and when you go to YouTube, it will eliminate the suggested videos. So you click on a link to watch a video that you want to watch that someone sent you. You watch that video and you're not tempted with any other content. We have an election coming up. They also have an extension that will erase the Facebook news feed. Oh, so good. It's like noise canceling headphones on an airplane, right? Or at a NASCAR race or something, because it's going to get very loud come November and lead up to November. A way for us to not get caught up in that in a negative way as Christians is to silence it, because most of those things are distractions. So you can eliminate your news feed there. There's a lot of really practical resources there. They have resources for parents, for teens, for educators. They have resources to help you get some change in your education system as well. So there's just a treasure trove of different things. There's a podcast called Your Undivided Attention that those two gentlemen there, Tristan and Asa, they do. It's a really interesting podcast where they talk about emerging technologies. Asa, again, was the coder, the software guy that basically created the Infinite Scroll. And then Tristan worked for Google, so they're in the industry, and they know what they're talking about. So I have found a lot of really good information from their stuff. And again, there's the list for the Amazon book list, the YouTube playlist, lots of videos on that one, informative TED Talks and interviews. There's a lot, and I think it's up to like 40-something videos, so you probably wouldn't want to just sit down in one sitting. But install that extension first, so you can just watch one video at a time, and you won't waste all your time there. But that was very good. And then if you're interested, this content was done in a 12-week Bible class setting first at Madison, and this takes you to, I believe, our YouTube page where that is housed. We also put those on podcast form, so if you search for Madison Church of Christ podcast, or Madison Church of Christ Bible Study podcast, then you can also find those there. Sorry, I feel like I'm in everybody's way. What other questions do you guys have, or better yet, what are some resources that you have found or that you've heard are beneficial and helpful that we could share with each other? Yes, ma'am.
Another friend here shared on Facebook, Officer Gomez.
Yes, that's right.
Just posts a lot of internet safety kind of stuff.
Yep.
It's for parents to know about their kids and
Yep.
devices and apps and stuff like that.
That's right. Officer Gomez.
There's a couple of things I'm sure from like VidAngel.
Mm-hmm.
One other one, like a filter.
Right.
You can use.
Yeah, VidAngel seems to be the most popular. VidAngel is actually, Angel Studios has come about from VidAngel. They're creating new content as well that is very family friendly. So it's something that you can actually buy into what they call their guild, and you can then have a say. It's kind of like the free market for entertainment. You can actually have a say in content. You can give suggestions and that sort of thing. So they're taking a really interesting direction. They've of course been in legal battles for several years now with all of the major companies, Warner Brothers and all the big movie companies, because they amend their art as they see it. And so they could definitely use support. They're usually asking for financial support as well to help combat some of those things. But they have some very strong filters that take out scenes and words and things like that. Yeah, that's a good one. What else? Got a great smile, Joseph.
Might be a little more dated, but it goes well with Common Sense Media. I use it as
That's
a
right.
teacher.
Yeah. Plugged in, yep. Is it just pluggedin.com? I forgot about them. Yep. Yeah. That's what we do. I remember when Google was just like a sound effect. Pluggedin.com, yes. It's that's basically Common Sense Media, but done by Focus on the Family. That's their version of it. Yep. A lot of good articles and reviews and things of that nature. Anything else? may have started late, but we ended early. That's how a preacher keeps his job. There you go. I cannot thank you enough for the hospitality that you all have shown, for welcoming me here, and especially for engaging with our content. As you can tell, I'm pretty passionate about this stuff. I think it's very important. It's also very fascinating, just from an interesting standpoint. But most of all, it is deeply spiritual. And the reason I started putting this together, one, for the class at Madison, and then realized, I think other places need to talk about, is we're just not having some of these conversations, and we're now decades into this digital age. So that's not great, but it's a place to start. And so my hope is that throughout the course of this weekend, whatever part you've been able to been in contact with this material, that you are a little bit better equipped to have the conversation. You're a little bit better equipped with a starting point. But please don't let, regardless of your life circumstance, don't let these conversations end here. They can't. They're of no value if they do that. These are intended to spark intrigue and to educate and to encourage for us to have more of these conversations. The reason this exists is because I looked around and I didn't find it anywhere. I didn't know where to go as a parent, for one, but I also had my experience as an adult, and I realized these conversations would have been pretty helpful at some point. So you have some great men here that are working diligently as ministers. Encourage them and be a resource to them. If you find a resource, that you think is beneficial, share it with Noah. He can share with other families. Let's not keep these things to ourselves. Let's share. Let's confess, but let's also encourage. And again, I just thank you so very much for allowing me to be a part of your weekend. Let's bow, and we'll be dismissed. Father in heaven, we are grateful for the opportunity again to come before your throne today, to gather in your name, to be better equipped as parents, as grandparents, as brothers and sisters in Christ, to do better as we move forward, to be wise and discerning in the way that we use technology and the way technology transforms us. Help us to focus on one thing, and that is your Son, becoming more like him. And help us to remove those things that distract us from that, to lay aside every weight that hinders us from you. Father, we love you and we thank you for hearing and answering our prayer. In Christ's name, amen.